Welcome back! Excellent to see you all here again. One night of breaking into a maximum security super prison for the paranormal and 4 monster stories later, and we've made it to the 2nd annual Candy Bowl here on Nightmind. But what is the Candy Bowl, you ask? Well, I'd say that was a good question if it wasn't the same one I've been trying to answer myself lately. You see, when I made the very first Candy Bowl special last year, it was meant to kickstart the other side of what Nightmind is. I had just gone through Marble Hornets and Half of Everyman Hybrid, did a bit of explaining for Alan tutorial and unedited footage of a bear, reviewed a few movies, but it still didn't feel like I was communicating how Nightmind is meant to be a major broadcasting station for new undiscovered material as well as big things that people already know. Candy Bowl was my first step towards a mission that's now become the main operation here. Night Vision, Case Files, Cat's Eye, all of these videos are essentially what I was trying to start up. So, if Candy Bowl had expanded into the full operation of the channel, then what even is the Candy Bowl now? Back during the first video, I said that Candy Bowl was a celebration of dark imagination and creativity. The act of setting a small fire of inspiration that turns into an awesome inferno as more people come and witness the blaze, who then in turn go and make their very own fires. I realized that the Candy Bowl can still be exactly that. We can celebrate dark imagination, creativity, and share treats that inspire us to make the next big thing, whether that source of inspiration is fictional, a myth, something online, or based in reality. A festival of creativity and creations, stories and scares, and in general, Halloween as our greatest night of the year. I came to understand that the Halloween Candy Bowl is a Halloween Candy Bowl. A bunch of treats and cool items all tossed into one container, celebrating Halloween for all it does and what it stands for. And with that little crisis over what the Candy Bowl is finally solved, I got to work exploring some new territory for tonight's feast and found something amazing I truly never expected to encounter. A way to honor the entire idea of Candy Bowl and what others have done for the same purpose. New England is the birthplace of many major events and influential stories, but this time of year, it's remembered as a titan of terror, responsible for delivering some of the oldest and most horrifying tales and folklore we share today. Many books, movies, and records have been made documenting everything that's come from the Northeast, and while we remember quite a lot of the names and stories from this territory, not all of them are widely celebrated or well known. John Whittier had been raised hearing the legends and folklore of New England, and while he greatly loved these stories, he came to realize the danger of losing them as he grew older and memory of their details faded. Whittier took it upon himself to become a collector of tales concerning the supernatural. Ghosts, monsters, demons, witchcraft. Nobody else was writing down what the people of New England were experiencing, so how could anyone expect to remember? To solve the issue, John Greenleaf Whittier wrote The Supernaturalism of New England, a collection and study of true stories that had been shared with him by people he encountered. Stories they had either heard from someone they knew experienced the supernatural, or events that had actually happened to them. The authenticity of these tales wasn't of primary issue to John. He just wanted to know the stories would survive, and those who wanted to understand the time period a bit could have a permanent way of doing so. The Supernaturalism of New England was written during the 1840s, and it was first printed in the year 1847. As old and obscure as this volume is, the book was put into circulation a number of times, ensuring that copies did survive to the modern age. Tonight may be the first time in several years these stories are read aloud, and may be the first time they've ever been recorded in video or audio format. The tales you're about to hear are over 170 years old, told by citizens of New England who swore they experienced the events, ranging in dates of occurrence from the late 1700s to the early 1800s. When it comes to undiscovered or barely known media, this is the oldest item I've found so far. And even though the stories within are frightening enough, the act of uncovering stories that are this old, possibly for the first time in years, on a scale like this, is chilling to think about. One of the most striking stories in Whittier's collection is of the kind usually thought of when a person considers occurrences of the supernatural in New England. He writes, "Some years ago, an elderly woman, familiarly known as Aunt Morse, died, leaving a handsome little property. No will was found, although it was understood before her decease that such a document was in the hands of Squire S., one of her neighbors. One cold winter evening, some weeks after her departure, Squire S. sat in his parlor looking over his papers when, hearing someone cough in a familiar way, he looked up and saw before him a little crooked old woman in an oil nut-colored woolen frock, blue and white tow and linen apron, and striped blanket, leaning her sharp pinched face on one hand, while the other supported a short black tobacco pipe, at which she was puffing in the most vehement and spiteful manner conceivable. The squire was a man of some nerve, but his first thought was to attempt an escape, from which he was deterred only by the consideration that any effort to that effect would necessarily bring him nearer to his unwelcome visitor. "Aunt Morse," he said at length, "for the Lord's sake, get right back to the burying ground. What on earth are you here for?" The apparition took her pipe deliberately from her mouth and informed him that she came to see justice done with her will, and that nobody need think of cheating her, dead or alive. Concluding her remark with a shrill emphasis, she replaced her pipe and puffed away with renewed vigor. The squire had reasons for retaining the document at issue, which he had supposed conclusive, but he had not reckoned upon the interference of the testator in the matter. Aunt Morse, when living, he had always regarded as a very shrew of a woman, and he now began to suspect that her recent change of condition had improved her the wrong way. He saw nothing better to be done under the circumstances than to promise to see the matter set right that very evening. The ghost nodded her head approvingly, and, knocking the ashes out of her pipe against the chimney, proceeded to fill it anew with a handful of tobacco from her side pocket. "And now, squire," she said, "if you'll just light my pipe for me, I'll be going." The squire was, as has been intimated, no coward. He had been out during the war in a Merrimack privateer and had seen sharp work off fail, but, as he said afterwards, it was no easy touch to lighting Aunt Morse's pipe. Aunt Morse drew 2 or 3 long preliminary whiffs to see that all was right, pulled her blanket over her head, and slowly hobbled out at the door. The squire, being true to his promise, was never again disturbed. During another chapter, Whittier writes about the fear of encountering the devil and those who had something personal to say about the idea, including this tale. "I do not recollect of ever meeting with but one sane person who believed he had seen the arch-adversary. He is a man of strong nerves, sound judgment in ordinary matters, and not particularly superstitious. He states that several years ago, when his mind was somewhat exercised, to use his own words, on the subject of his religious duties, he was standing one moonlit evening in a meditative mood on the bridge which crosses Little River near its junction with the Merrimack. Suddenly, he became sensible of a strange feeling, as if something terrible was near at hand. A vague terror crept over him. I knew," said he in relating the story, "that something bad and frightful was behind me. I felt it. And when I did look round, there on the bridge, within a few paces of me, a huge black dog was sitting with the face of a man. A human face, if ever I saw one, turned full up to the moonlight. It remained just long enough to give me a clear view of it, and then vanished. And ever since, when I think of Satan, I call to mind the dog-man on the bridge." The tale of a monster on the bridge is followed by a supernatural encounter of another kind, which almost ended up never being told. Whittier writes, "I recollect a statement made to me by a gentleman who has had bitter experiences of the evils of alcoholism, and who is at this time devoting his fine talents to the cause of philanthropy and mercy, as the editor of one of our best temperance journals, which left a most vivid impression on my mind. He had just returned from a sea voyage, and, for the sake of enjoying a debauch unmolested by his friends, took up his abode in a rum-selling tavern in a somewhat lonely location on the seaboard. Here he drank for many days without stint, keeping himself the whole time in a state of semi-intoxication. One night, he stood leaning against a tree, looking listlessly and vacantly out upon the ocean, the waves breaking on the beach, and the white sails of passing vessels, vaguely impressing him like the pictures of a dream. He was startled by a voice whispering hoarsely in his ear, 'You have murdered a man. The officers of justice are after you. You must fly for your life.' Every syllable was pronounced slowly and separately, and there was something in the hoarse, gasping sound of the whisper which was indescribably dreadful. He looked around him, and seeing nothing but the clear moonlight on the grass, became partially sensible that he was the victim of illusion, and a sudden fear of insanity thrilled him with a momentary terror. Rallying himself, he returned to the tavern, drank another glass of brandy, and retired to his chamber. He had scarcely laid his head on the pillow when he heard that hoarse, low, but terribly distinct whisper repeating the same words. He describes his sensations at this time as inconceivably fearful. Reason was struggling with insanity, but amid the confusion and mad disorder, one terrible thought evolved itself. Had he not, in a moment of mad frenzy, of which his memory made no record, actually murdered someone? And was not this a warning from heaven? Leaving his bed and opening his door, he heard the words again repeated, with the addition, in a tone of intense earnestness, "Follow me." He walked forward in the direction of the sound, through a long entry to the head of a staircase where he paused for a moment, when again he heard the whisper halfway down the stairs, "Follow me." Trembling with terror, he passed down 2 flights of stairs, and found himself treading on the cold brick floor of a large room in the basement or cellar where he had never been before. The voice still beckoned him onward. Groping after it, his hand touched an upright post, apparently only 2 or 3 yards in front of him. Putting one foot forward while his hand still grasped the post, it fell upon empty air, and he with difficulty recovered himself. Kneeling down and feeling with his hands, he found himself on the very edge of a large, uncovered tank, filled well nigh to the top with water. The sudden shock of this discovery broke the horrible enchantment. The whisperer fell silent. He believed at the time that he had been the subject and nearly the victim of a diabolical delusion. Whittier's book also involved many stories of supposed witchcraft, but none too horrible or full to compose major tales. This was no surprise, as according to the writing, even the people of the 1840s knew what a horror story the Salem witch trials were, and they apparently felt as strongly about it as we do in 2016. Magic and spells had come to be less of a death sentence, and much more occurrences of superstitious action that were frowned upon. But one practice of witchcraft Whittier noticed as still prevalent in their society, and he provided this passage on the subject. The practice of charms, or what is popularly called trying projects, is still, to some extent, continued among us. One of the most perilous of these projects is as follows. A young woman goes down into the cellar or into a dark room with a mirror in her hand, and looking into it sees the face of her future husband peering at her through the darkness. A neighbor of mine, in speaking of this conjuration, insists that there is something in it and adduces a case in point. One of her schoolmates made the experiment and saw the face of a strange man in the glass, and many years afterward she saw the very man pass her father's door. He proved to be an English emigrant, just landed, and in due time became her husband. Tales of hauntings, monsters, and otherworldly encounters may be met with laughter and criticism today, but it does seem that Whittier hit on something that would certainly survive the span of time between the 1800s and now. Rituals. The love of a good game has never faded in human beings, and around this time of year, the interest in playing a new sort will always rise. Other people can be fun at first, but what's even more fun is playing with something else. In this season, in this month, when the divide between the physical world and the spiritual is at its weakest, the tempting nature of rituals hit their peak, as participants from the other side lie in wait, just a few lit candles and well-placed mirrors away. Rituals, conjurings, and games played against opponents outside the veil of reality have always been around. There's Bloody Mary, of course, the most famous of them all, and you have the all-time favorite, light as a feather, stiff as a board. But those games, with all fright and no prize, those are the ones that circulate and just get people killed or mentally scarred. The ones that few people talk about, the really powerful rituals, those are the ones that offer rewards. Not that I would encourage anyone watching to ever attempt a ritual, of course. There is always a price to pay when it comes to dealing with spirits of power. Even if you were to win a game with a monster, they might hold a grudge over your victory, and some prizes you're given may not be what they seem, coming to the winner as a wish from the monkey's paw. But in honor of tonight's Meeting of Worlds, I have compiled 3 rituals, all of which can be used to play a game of chance and wit against powerful beings for a prize, especially on a night like this. I do not, however, condone or encourage the playing of these games, just the satiating of curiosity through our presentation here. Gambling with your flesh, blood, mind, life, or soul is a foolish and terrible idea, and games like these are delivered to humans by those who want them to play. Therefore, they should not be trusted. Invitations from strangers with offerings like these should never be opened. How good are you at hide and seek? Good enough to make a wager? Are you desperate enough to play for a prize of your choosing? In that case, there's a competitor waiting for you, and he loves this game. The ritual for dry bones is very simple to perform. All you need is a box of matches, a bathroom with a mirror, and expert hiding skills. To begin, a player will close all the doors in their house firmly and make sure they're tightly locked up. All of the cabinets, cupboards, and boxes too. Anything that can be opened. All of the lights must be turned off, and if something electric is making a light, it must be turned off, unplugged, or covered up. They will then wait until precisely 12:01 a.m. Not a minute early, not a minute late. At this time, those who play the game go into the bathroom and look at the mirror. They will close their eyes and make sure the house is completely silent. If a noise is heard, it means that something else has come instead of dry bones, and the player must escape from the house immediately, find a safe place, and survive until dawn. Otherwise, if all is quiet, the player can think of what they want for their prize. The more realistic, the higher the chance it will be exactly what was requested. A match will then be lit, and the player must hold it until it burns out. Blowing out the match will anger dry bones. If the match burns for at least 15 seconds, the summoning has started. A player will then lie on the ground and repeat the following phrase: "I am aware of your presence, and I welcome you into my home. Come now." The player will enter the largest room of their house and wait. The time spent here varies, but when the opponent has arrived, there will be a faint moaning sound. Any other sound means a different opponent has come, and again, the player must escape immediately. If the moaning of dry bones is heard, the game is on. The player hides, and dry bones will seek. The game lasts until 3 a.m., at which point the player is in the winning position. They must go back to the largest room in their house where they began and say, "Thank you for playing, but you must leave now. You are no longer welcome." Dry bones will make the same sound as before, a low, echoing moan. Until the player hears this, they must repeat the phrase. The next morning, after waking up, a player should check the front door. If the prize was a physical item, it will be within reach. If the prize was an action or something that cannot be held, confirmation of success will come that day. There are warnings that come with playing this game, the first being, don't. The second is that if you select a person's death or harm done to them as your prize, dry bones may consider winning the game to be too low a form of payment, and he might come around again to claim what he believes to be suitable. Playing the game also invites him to come around again at a later date, although he cannot harm you unless you start another round. It's unknown what he'll be doing in your home again, but players do not want to see him. You may want to move after you perform this ritual. Finally, the game should only ever be played once, if ever at all. Dry bones never feels happy about losing, and he will try harder if you play again. As for what happens if he finds you, well, there's a reason he's called Dry Bones. Other people have referred to him as Cold Bones for the same reason. What he takes from you is something you'll never get back, and you're going to regret losing it the moment that he claims his prize. While some people want material objects or an action performed that only a spirit can do, others enjoy information or desperately need to know something they can't get an answer to by normal means. For those who feel this way and have 9 friends who feel the same, the answer man is waiting. This ritual comes from Japan, where it's been around for a few years. 10 people will sit in a circle, all with a cell phone they must be willing to throw away. Each player must have their phone ready to call the number of the person to their left. On the count of 3, they will all press the dial button. A busy signal will be heard on every phone for a moment. Then, if the ritual is successful, one of these phones will suddenly make a connection. The answer man has picked up, and now the game begins. Each player is allowed to ask a question, and they will be given a true answer, because the answer man cannot lie and he knows all. However, that includes information about you, and in return for your question, he will ask you something. There's no telling what he'll ask, but the rest of the players will hear it, and they will certainly hear your answer. If a player answers with complete honesty, they will be spared. The more valuable the answer is to a question the player asked, the more damaging the question asked by the answer man will be, and the more dangerous the result for not telling the truth. If a player's answer is not satisfying, the answer man will reach through the phone and tear off a body part from the player who failed. The more damaging the question, the more valuable the body part stolen will be. Questions of the highest value will result in a wager for the player's life, with answer man ripping out their throat for failure. Players who do not answer after being given a warning by the answer man will be killed much more painfully. Anyone who breaks the circle or hangs up early after witnessing an attack will also be killed. The circle will continue until the final person receives the phone. After their session, the answer man will offer another round, but raise the stakes. At this point, player 10 can say goodbye, ending the ritual, or they can continue. At any time, during any round, attempting to stop the circle before player 10 results in the answer man offering free information. If the player who tries to hang up early takes the deal, the person to their left will receive a much more damaging question, putting them in much greater jeopardy. After hanging up, every player must immediately destroy their phone. It may ring during the process, but the player must not answer. Under no circumstances must the phone be kept intact or with a player. Finally, there is a game for those who want something besides material objects and information. If a person is determined, observant, and has strong discipline, they might just be tempted to play an interesting game called The Man in the Fields. In order to perform this ritual, a person must be in a home with a large garden or backyard. In this house, there must be at least one room with only one door. The room should be mostly empty, and the door should have a lock. It doesn't need one, but having a lock is helpful. The player also needs a source of lighting that is not electric. Fire is the only acceptable option. They also require a crucifix and a mechanical watch. No cell phones or electric devices. The ritual begins at night, but the starting time is entirely up to the player depending on what they wish to gain. If the game begins 3 hours before midnight, the prize will be a full calendar year of perfect health. No ailments, no fatigue, nothing but optimal condition. If the game is played 2 hours before midnight, the prize will be perfect physical and financial health for a full year. Money will flow as easily as water, and the winner will be in perfect health to enjoy all of it, no matter what they're buying. If the game begins 1 hour before midnight, the player gains the ultimate prize: infallibility. Perfect health, perfect finances, and perfect luck. No matter what you do for a full year, you cannot lose or experience a negative outcome. Once a player has decided when to begin, they will make sure the home and backyard are entirely clear of other people before the starting time. When the clock strikes the right moment, the method of lighting must be activated. A player will turn on their lantern or light their torch or candle. A player enters the backyard and faces the house. Then they repeat a phrase 7 times. But who will scare the crows away? After the final repetition, they will stop and listen. If nothing is heard, the summoning failed for the precise ritual, but may have succeeded in attracting something else. A player leaves the house for the night and should only come back in the morning. If the summoning works, the player will hear a voice behind them say, "That's not your biggest problem." A player must walk to their house and close the door behind them. They must not look back. They cannot, under any circumstance, look behind them. Once inside the house, the player enters the room with only one door. Anything inside the room that can be opened must be closed. Absolutely everything. After closing it all, the crucifix must be set down in the upright position where it will not fall over. This is now a safe room. Taking the source of lighting, the player must then go around the house and complete the challenge, closing absolutely every single thing in the home that can be opened before the clock strikes midnight. While performing the challenge, a player may spot a man with skin like ashes in the house. He is not there to hurt them, only to observe. As the player moves around the house, there is only one rule: do not look into the backyard. If they do, the player must immediately run to the safe room, close the door, lock it, grab the crucifix, hold it tightly, and hope they didn't leave anything in the safe room open. The player must remain inside until 6 a.m. and under no circumstances can they open the door. If the player refrains from looking into the backyard and closes every last thing in the house before midnight, they may go to bed. Once they close their eyes to sleep, they must not open them. If they remain like this until 6 a.m., they win. If they wake up after 6 a.m., they win. So what happens if the player left anything in the house open? They lose. What happens if they close every item in the house before trying the ritual? The next time they open something, they lose. What happens if they lose? Well, that's the scary part. No one who loses under any condition has ever come back to let us know. So, maybe you're not the type of person to gamble with your life, body parts, or soul in a wager with a monster. Perhaps you're just the kind of person who enjoys fun, even if the game is a little bit off. In this case, I do have something for you, if you can actually manage to find it. There are 1 or 2 people online who claim to have copies, but their stories end rather abruptly and we can't get any answers out of them. We could always try asking the company that made it if they were still around, but in a dark twist of fate, Killswitch really did kill the Karvina Corporation. The only full report of events in the story goes like this. In the spring of 1989, the Karvina Corporation released a curious game with a dissemination among American students that fall that was swift and furious, though its popularity was ultimately short-lived. The game was Killswitch. On the surface, it was a variant on the mystery or horror survival game, a precursor to the Myst and Silent Hill franchises. The narrative showed the complexity for which Karvina was known, though the graphics were monochrome, gray and white shapes against a black background. Players could choose between 2 avatars, an invisible demon named Ghast, or a visible human woman, Porto. Playing as Ghast was considerably more difficult due to his total invisibility, and players were highly liable to restart the game as Porto after the first level, in which it was impossible to gauge jumps or aim. However, Ghast was clearly the more powerful character. He had fire breath and a cold steam attack. But as it was above the skill level of most players to keep track of where a fire-breathing, poison-dispensing invisible imp was on their screens once the fire and steam ran out, Porto became the default. Porto's only ability was seemingly random growth. She expanded and contracted in size throughout the game. A Kansas engineering grad claimed to have figured out the pattern involved, but his work was lost. Porto awakens in the dark with wounds in her elbows, confused. Seeking a way out, she ascends a coal mine in which it is slowly revealed that she was once an employee, investigating its collapse and beset on all sides by demons similar to Ghast, as well as dead foremen and demonic inspectors from the Sovatic Corporation, whose boxy bodies were clothed in red, the only color in the game. The story emerges through Porto's discovery of magnetic tapes, files, mutilated factory workers who were once her friends, and deciphering an impressively complex code inscribed on a series of iron axes players must collect. This portion of the game was almost laughably complex, and defeated many players until Porto881 posted the cipher to a Columbia BBS. Attempts to contact this player have failed, and the username is no longer in use on any known service. Porto's investigation reveals that the foremen, under pressure to increase coal production, began falsifying reports of malfunctions to explain low output, which incited a Sovatic inspection. Officials arrived, and a horrible story of torture unfolds, with fuzzy and indistinct graphics of red-coated men standing over workers, inserting small knives into their joints whenever production slowed. Porto eventually finds a tape recorder with a worker's ghost inside. He tells her that the fires of the earth had risen up and imbued the mine equipment with power, bringing them life so they could gain revenge for the tortured foremen. However, they did not have eyes to see or ears to hear, and the machines ended up killing everyone they encountered, employee of the corporation or mine worker. Porto encounters a room just after this with a coal processing machine, and once again, the online account Porto881 provided lost players the solution to move forward. Eating the coal would give Porto control over her growing powers, and she could make her way out of the final tunnel system with evidence of what happened in the mine. Unfortunately, there would never be an ending to her story. Killswitch, by design, deletes itself upon player completion of the game. It is not recoverable by any means. All trace of it is removed from the user's computer. The game cannot be copied. For all intents and purposes, it exists only for those playing it, and then ceases to be entirely. One cannot replay it, unlocking further secrets or narrative pathways. One cannot allow anyone else to play it. And perhaps most importantly, it is impossible to experience the game all the way to the end as both Porto and Ghast. Predictably, player outcry was enormous. Many routes to solve the problem were pursued with no real outcome. The first and most common was to simply buy more copies of the game, but Karvina Corporation released only 5,000 copies and refused to press further editions. The following is an excerpt from their May 1990 press release. Killswitch was designed to be a unique playing experience. Like reality, it is unrepeatable, unretrievable, and illogical. One might even say ineffable. Death is final. Death is complete. The fates of Porto and her beloved guest are as unknowable as our own. It is the desire of the Karvina Corporation that this be so, and we ask our customers to respect that desire. The word beloved caught the interest of committed, even obsessive players, as Guest is not present in any portion of Porto's story. A rush to find remaining copies of the game ensued with the intent of playing as Guest and discovering the meaning of Karvina's cryptic word. The most popular theory was that Guest would at some point become the fumes inhaled by Porto, changing her size and beginning her adventure. Some thought that this was wishful thinking, that if only Guest's early levels were passable, one would somehow be able to play as both simultaneously. However, by this time, no further copies appeared to be available in retail outlets. Players who had not yet completed the game attempted Guest levels, but the difficulty of actually playing this enigmatic avatar persisted, and no player has ever completed the game as Guest. To find any copy usable today is a shockingly rare occurrence. A shrink-wrapped copy was sold at auction in 2005 for $733,000 to Yamamoto Ryuichi of Tokyo. It's entirely possible that Yamamoto had the last remaining copy of the game. Knowing this, Yamamoto intended to open his playthrough to everyone, filming and uploading his progress. However, to date, the only film which has been uploaded is a 1-minute and 45-second clip of a haggard Yamamoto at his computer, the avatar choice screen visible over his right shoulder. Yamamoto is crying. But if Yamamoto never even began his playthrough, how do we have all this footage of the game? The answer is simple, but adds more mystery to the entire affair. On YouTube, a channel by the name Bartosz Chalupnik uploaded his playthrough of the game as Proto after finding a copy, and also tried to make it through as Guest. We only know about his videos because any searches online for Karvina Corporation lead to their YouTube channel, which has Bartosz as the only related channel. Seeing how Karvina folded after Killswitch, it's almost a guarantee that this channel has no relation to the now-dead company. Whoever's behind it is recycling gameplay footage from Bartosz to make mysterious videos, and the associated Twitter account is making threats against him, alluding to a home invasion that Bartosz reported. And in case you haven't guessed already, the reason all of this is happening is because it's another case of online horror storytelling. There was never a Karvina Corporation, there was never a Killswitch game, and Bartosz, whoever they are, is a champion for crafting all these gameplay videos just to pull off the illusion. The story on the website Invisible Games is a work of fiction. The site is an archive for keeping stories of this nature, and you can have a great night exploring these entries. I'll be sure to put the link in the video description for you, along with a link for something to help out anyone who had been genuinely interested in playing something like Killswitch. Just because games and stories like these aren't real, it doesn't mean that there aren't awesome creators out there developing ones like them. One such hero, for example, is a name you might have heard recently. Kitty Horrorshow. Her latest release, Anatomy, is a unique experience that uses mechanics to play with fear in ways that I've never seen before in a game. How is a body like a house? How is a house like a body? And what happens to a body that loses a soul? These questions are all provoked by playing through this empty house with a deceivingly simple appearance. Players collect audio tapes as they journey throughout the home, going into rooms and spaces that become harder and harder to enter. Meanwhile, the cues of a VHS tape roll across the screen, alluding to a secret aspect of the story. Is this found footage? Are you recording it yourself on your journey? Or is there another meaning entirely to this framing device? Anatomy is a chilling journey giving off all the signs of a truly brilliant mind behind the game. Kitty Horrorshow has it on sale through itch.io for $2.99, but offers almost all of her other games for free, each of which provides story and meaning offered by the environment and incidental information. If David Lynch made horror games, these may be the result. On a night like this, a Kitty Horrorshow marathon would be more than appropriate. It's encouraged. But before you delve into the collection of free games, and maybe even feel brave enough to try out Anatomy, I have one more treat for you. One of the major missions of Nightmind, and the Candy Bowl especially, is to inspire and celebrate the independent creator and their work. Original media is tough to find, especially on YouTube, and those who are brave enough to make something new and unique are the people I will always stand behind. Patreon has made it possible to begin supporting creators in ways beyond just covering them on here, and in the spirit of our first steps towards an active record of empowering new dark media, I'm very happy to introduce the very first Nightmind world premiere for an original short film. I've shown you plenty of monsters and horrors this Halloween, a lot of scares and terrors. It's easily understood if you go to bed and wake up in the middle of the night scared out of rest by a very bad dream. But in a world where even the most quiet and gentle neighborhoods can experience evil, can you trust yourself to know when you're living a nightmare or just dreaming about one? Can you tell a false awakening from the real event? In anticipation of many more premieres to come, it is my great pleasure on this Halloween night to introduce a new American nightmare. Creatures of the Night, I give you Driver.
Hey there. I just moved here. Are you part of this area? Are you thinking about moving here? If you have kids, there's a good school that's like a block away. I don't have kids myself, but it's gonna happen. Me and the missus, we're gonna make it. I'm making this place.
And that, everybody, is the end of this year's Halloween celebration on the Nightmind channel. Major thanks to Nick Spheres for contributing his original short film as the very first world premiere, hopefully establishing a new yearly tradition for the Halloween Candy Bowl. Equal thanks goes out to all of my supporters on Patreon who made this Halloween possible, and whose contributions ensure that there will be even bigger productions than this year's October Nights Festival well before next Halloween. Stick around to see all of these awesome contributors' names at the end of the video. And thanks to you, all of you, for continuing to support the Nightmind channel and joining me here on Halloween. If you're looking for something to do tonight, I highly recommend checking out some of the other entries on the Invisible Games site, and playing some of the many free games by Kitty Horrorshow. And if you've got enough money for a soda and a candy bar in hand, I think you might get quite an interesting Halloween experience from playing Anatomy. A word of advice: if you ever get kicked out of the house, make sure you go back inside. It's not done with you yet. Thanks again for joining me in the dark this evening, and for this, the greatest night of the year. Once more, I'm Nick Nocturne, and I'll be seeing you again real soon. Sleep tight, and have a very happy Halloween.